Thursday afternoon. Thank you for coming today. My name is Britt Royer and I'm the curator here at St. Mary's College Museum of Art. Today's program, Saint Toussaint and Sinner the Overture, Hagiography or Cancellation, features SMC professor and scholar Claude-Rhéal Malary. This program is presented in collaboration with 44 Days and the Black Leadership Coalition at St. Mary's College of California. We invited Professor Malary to explore his research and dialogue with Jacob Lawrence's Toussaint the Overture series. This series features the beloved leader and cultural icon of the Haitian Revolution. Lawrence's depiction of the leader, both in his paintings in the 1936, 1938, and then later as prints in 1980s, you'll see those prints around this gallery space here, reflect the political and social significance of memory and identity. Professor Malary's research examines Lawrence's work through the diasporic lens of Black Americans, visual iconography, and cultural symbols. His approach questions the lens of which Lawrence viewed Toussaint, asking if recent scholarship on the Haitian icon shattered that lens, and if so, what might be the proper lens from which to view and therefore depict Toussaint today. A native and citizen of Haiti, Professor Malary earned his doctoral degree in Hispanic letters from Brown University. He teaches Hispanophone and Francophone literature in the Department of World Languages and Cultures. He has published articles on plague representation, postmodernism, and immigrant women in Spain, the introduction of books of poems, and short stories. So please join me in welcoming Malary.
Thank you for coming. Really, thank you. I had no idea how many to expect. And I'm pleasantly surprised. I did not expect so many. And it is my fervent hope that you can all find a very comfortable place. I was at a concert in Santiago de Compostela, and Silvio Rodriguez, Cuban singer, from what they call the Nueva Trova, revolutionary, played in front of maybe 3,000 people. Amanda was there, and after about a good 15, 20 minutes he was playing, there were maybe 2,000 people outside who could not get in. And it's like, we would make noise and bang and bang and bang. They too were revolutionaries. And they insisted on inclusion. And Silvio Rodriguez stopped the concert and said, please let them in. And they did. I still don't know how they found a place to sit. So I have that same ethic. Please do find a place. There are 4 seats here for anyone. So the challenge for this was actually to find something worthwhile to share with you. And entry is often the most difficult. The pictures, the prints should speak for themselves, and I think they do. And I've done about 2 visits of this, and the closer I got to being ready, the more I found that he captured some of the essence of Toussaint Louverture's life in the Haitian Revolution. So what got me in was an article by Henry Louis Gates in the New York Times. If you don't know anything about him, he's a juggernaut. He's a black scholar of African American studies. He publishes in graduate school. I read The Signifying Monkey in a literary theory course, and that was just the beginning of a very prolific career. So he recently wrote an essay titled, Who's Afraid of Black History? That was on February 27th, 2023. His opening salvo features the following nugget. And I believe I have that here. That would be the very first. So he goes, school is one of the first places where society as a whole begins to shape our sense of what it means to be an American. It is in our schools that we learn how to become citizens, that we encounter the first civics lessons that either reinforce or counter the myths and fables we gleaned at home and on television, etc. I did each day of first grade in my elementary school in Piedmont, West Virginia, in 1956 began with the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, followed by America, my country, 'tis of thee. To this day, I cannot prevent my right hand from darting to my heart the minute I hear the words of freedom. And I put in bold these because I think they're significant. They reveal his post-structural, post-colonial bona fides. Right? It's very Foucaultian. It's not just the mind, it's the heart. This is how you shape subjectivity. So it is through such rituals repeated over and over that certain truths become second nature, self-evident, as it were. It is how the foundations of our understanding of the history of our great nation are constructed. And I don't quite believe him when he says about great nation, but I understand exactly why he says it. So Gates thus sets the predicate that education, especially primary school education, fulfills ideological functions. What prompted his essay is, of course, the American right's opposition to what it crudely calls critical race theory. And I use the adverbial adjective crudely because, as Gates' discourse suggests, it is not just critical race theory that should irk the right, but also post-structuralism, post-colonialism, constructivism in general, and then Derridian deconstruction in particular, in queer theory. There's nothing particular. It's a very strange phenomenon because they focused on critical race theory, which derives from a bunch of brothers and sisters that are left completely unmolested. And a similar thing is happening in France, where they refer to wokeism and identity politics as something important from America, when really it's French contributed to that stuff, maybe more than Americans. Yes, and it's true. There's actually a book written fairly recently that basically makes the point that it took popularity in America for the French to embrace the Foucaults and so on, Barthes and Lyotard. They were almost bigger stars in America than they were in France. In any case, the American right's opposition is exemplified by the rejection by Ron DeSantis, the current governor of Florida, of a proposed curriculum which, in his view, is driven by an agenda. In his response, Gates makes 2 points in one fell swoop. The first is that American history, and therefore the teaching of it, has always been a battleground. The second is that Governor DeSantis is but the latest embodiment of a tendency on the part of the right to either underwrite or remain silent regarding a take on American history that glorifies the likes of George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and Thomas Jefferson, and to vilify the take that takes a dim or critical view of them. This is how ideology functions per Eagleton, invisibly. It is very good at pointing ideology elsewhere, as if it itself is just like breathing. So, Gates mentions that what is deemed true or false regarding the three phenomena in American history is particularly contested. They are slavery, Reconstruction, and Jim Crow. It's no coincidence that race features prominently in all three. What is at stake for the right is, of course, the preservation and the perpetuation of an identity. By suturing Americans to that identity, it is easier to enlist them in projects that may be political, economic, psychic, and imperial. They go to war. And they participate in capitalism and so on. What is at stake for, and here I really struggled. I wasn't sure what the right words were. I don't want to say the left. because that's way too pregnant. I don't want to say wokeness, even worse. And I don't want to say the resistance. So I'll just say post-colonial subjects, such as black folks and others in America and elsewhere. A perennial concern among post-colonial thinkers and theorists has been the psychic wounds occasioned by the erasures of certain cultures, the silencing of certain histories, and their replacement by the colonizers' truths and the iconographies that sustain them. This concern is evident in the thought of W.E.B. Du Bois and Frederick Douglass. It is palpable in Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth and Black Skin, White Mask. If there is a telos, a goal, a purpose in Fanon's work, it is the restoration of black humanity through, in his view, decolonization. And that's quite important. There's freedom and then there's decolonization. They're not one and the same thing, which I think my talk is largely about. This concern defines the negritude of Aimé Césaire and Léopold Senghor, and the black is beautiful of the Harlem Renaissance, with which Jacob Lawrence is often associated, duly, I think. The Afro-pessimism of Frank Wilderson and Jared Sexton is suffused with it. So Afro-pessimism is the new ism in black nationalist thought. So it doesn't take too much acumen to identify it in the Black Lives Matter movement. Most importantly, the concern with Black Sight explains the designation of February as Black History Month, and therefore this August Museum's decision to feature an exhibition of Jacob Lawrence's homage to Toussaint Louverture and the Haitian Revolution. I take it as axiomatic that it is an homage. I don't think that's quite debatable. One is hard-pressed to find a better illustration of how Toussaint Louverture serves to soothe black psychic wounds than the broadside poem/play by Tozaki Shange titled "For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough." It was published originally in 1975. So this is a poem. She dedicates about 6-7 pages to this girl's imaginings, phantasms with of Toussaint Louverture. So I will read a few, I don't know what to call them, stanza. It is so edgy. And it's also quite fitting. It reminds me of Creole. It's very spoken, very almost breaks grammatical, syntactic rules purpose. It was very, very difficult to write because every time I think I made a mistake, but it wasn't. It is exactly how it's written. To this day, every time I look at it, it's like this must be a mistake, but it's not. It's very spoken, very similar to Creole. So, Lady in Brown, you can see. The library was right down from the trolley tracks, across from the laundromat, through the big shining floors and granite pillars of St. Louis, old St. Louis, famous for, I found Toussaint, but not till after months of Cajun Katie, Pippin Longstocking, Christopher Robin, Eddie Hayward, and a poor bear in the children's room. Only pioneer girls and magic rabbits and big city white boys. I knew I wasn't supposed to, but I ran the adult reading room and came across Toussaint. My first black man. I never counted George Washington Carver because I didn't like peanuts. Still, Toussaint was a black man, a Negro like my mama said, who refused to be a slave, and he spoke French and didn't know no white man to tell him nothing. Not Napoleon, not Maximilien, not Robespierre. Toussaint Louverture was the beginning of reality for me in the summer contest for who colored girls can read. 15 books in 3 weeks. one engraved by Toussaint Louverture at the afternoon ceremony was disqualified because Toussaint belonged in the adult reading room. And I cried and carried dead Toussaint home in the book. He was dead and living to me because Toussaint then, they held the citadel against the French with the spirits of all dead Africans from out of the ground. Toussaint led the army of zombies, walking cannonball, shooting spirits to free Haiti. And there wasn't slaves no more. This is just the beginning. It's like 3-4 more pages. And so she goes out and Toussaint serves as bodyguard, lover, guardian angel, inspiration, muse, and then eventually she comes across someone who is trying to accost her, and she rebuffs him, and then he insists, and then there's this exchange, and when she says Toussaint, she's talking to this phantasm, and she said, why do you say my name? And the man's name happens to be Toussaint, his first name. And so so am I here suggesting that Jacob Lawrence's pictorial depiction of Toussaint Louverture is akin to that Shange, to Shange's poetic depiction of him? Yes, I am. Am I suggesting that they may serve similar purposes? Yes. Am I suggesting that Jacob Lawrence's reason for depicting Toussaint Louverture was to alleviate Black American trauma? No, not quite. I think it's overdetermined, completely overdetermined. The reasons, if reasons there be, have to be multiple. One might be that it's purely artistic, whatever that means. There is such a strong family resemblance between Haitian art and Jacob Lawrence's that to me it seems the most natural thing in the world for him to paint Haitian subjects. So you have the bold colors, very sketch outline subjects, the so-called primitivism, or naive strokes. My guess is that if today you put in actually any moment in Haitian artistic history, you put any 10 of Jacob Lawrence's many paintings in a Haitian gallery, like the Nader, that's a big one, only those in the know would identify them as non-Haitian. My introduction to Lawrence came when I returned from Haiti, actually from Martinique, with a painting of a Haitian artist. And a friend of ours saw it and she was like, whoa, I loved it. It reminds me of, this is Jacob Lawrence. And I was like, Jacob Lawrence, who's that? I had seen some of his stuff, but I didn't, the name and the things. And then when I started paying attention, there was a definite family resemblance. It was very familiar to me. I am not suggesting either that Lawrence's selection of Toussaint Louverture as a subject is extraordinary. In Haiti, the icons of the revolution are common subjects. In 2004, the bicentennial anniversary of Haitian independence, every artist and her cousin painted something. Today, at Galerie Monet in Pétionville, and I know people here who've been to Galerie Monet, quite a few, Charlie, Luke, and Tiffany. We got a chance after the earthquake, we went to Galerie Monet, so I'm glad they're here. So at any moment you can pick, you could walk away and buy a few those paintings. So this is one today. This is at the Galerie Monet. It was painted in 2014. It's by Serge Mollet-Anglaise, who comes from a dynasty. The brother is even famous. He's more famous. The brother's more surrealist painter. And so I think there's like 2 or 3 of them. And it's quite common in Haiti. It's something that's still very much alive and well. It's rare that you have one very good artist and they don't pass it on to your son or brother or sister. So the previous one is Toussaint Louverture on his horse. Right? Always seems to be a horse. Right? Dessalines on his horse. Right? Christophe on his horse. And the fourth in that series is Pétion, who is often, if there's going to be a fourth, it's likely to be Pétion. And that's actually quite racial. Pétion was kind of the icon of the mulattoes, of the light-skinned class in Haiti. Pétionville, where Monet and Nader are, it's a very bougie part of town, is it's named after him. That's why I went to school. This is where I went to. So this is where I learned in Pétionville at the brother school, actually. I learned École des Frères du Sacré-Cœur, the Sacred Heart. I learned Haitian history. What is it about narratives about the Haitian Revolution in general and about Toussaint Louverture in particular that might be deemed amenable to healing black psychic wounds, to augmenting black self-esteem? I remember being sutured to the Haitian flag in primary school, very much the same way that Gates was sutured to the American flag. So I'll give you a brief overview of the Haitian Revolution as it was transmitted to me as a pupil. It's likely that similar tidbits inspired Shange to depict Toussaint Louverture, Shange to describe with words, poetically, Toussaint Louverture, and Jacob Lawrence to paint. So Haiti was formerly called Saint-Domingue. Saint-Domingue. It shares the western third of the island of Hispaniola, that's what the whole island is called, with the Spanish-speaking Dominican Republic. When Christopher Columbus landed there in 1492, he had found the conditions idyllic, rich in resources, peaceful, with a significant healthy population of Taino or Arawak Indians. Estimates run at about 8 million. He founded the first Spanish settlement called La Navidad, nativity. By 1510, the number of Indians was about 50,000. By the end of the century, the French defeated Spain in Europe, and French and Spain signed the treaty, what is called the Treaty of Ryswick. And you have to recite this stuff with the dates in school. In 1697, so that was an important transition from Spanish rule to, and then there's going to be quite a few back and forths. And even England and Holland get involved. So this happened, the treaty in 1697. It formally acknowledged French possession of Haiti. And by that time, the Arawaks were completely decimated. Enslaved Africans replaced them, partly thanks to Bartolomé de las Casas. The colony became one of the world's richest. It hosted the greatest markets for the African slave trade. Since a third to half of the slaves died within a year of arrival, fresh supplies were brought from Africa constantly. So it was one of those brutal places for slavery. The logic of this was simple and based on mathematical equations. It took only 7 years for a slave owner to make a profit from his initial investment in a slave. In 100 years, 1 million African slaves were killed. So economically, it made little sense to keep a slave alive for more than 4 to 7 years. But this practice had some positive consequences depending on your view. One of them was that it allowed the enslaved people to keep their languages, religions, customs, and cultural values. Voodoo was preserved, Creole, the language, emerged, and the mulatto class also emerged. There's going to be some tensions between those, significant tensions. Haiti represents almost Africa in the Caribbean, Latin America. It's an interesting thing. If you go to Puerto Rico, you go to Martinique, you go to Guadeloupe, and there's a darkening of the skin that happens progressively that is quite stunning. So, in the 1970s, in the 1760s, Macandal, who had been born in Africa, led the slaves' attempt. So he was born in Africa. He's not born as a slave, which is significant. Led the slaves' attempt to free themselves by poisoning thousands of whites So poison was a major weapon. Macandal was fatally punished for his efforts. 3 decades later, in the early months of 1791, the mulattoes rebelled against the status quo. It was kind of interesting because the brutality, we are told, Foucault in Discipline and Punish documents this and explains this quite well. Spectacular punishment was the rule, and sometimes it backfires. Instead of cowering people, forcing people to cower, it triggers rebellion. So 3 decades later, in the early months of 1790, the mulattoes rebelled against the status quo. No mention was made then of the slaves. A few months later, the slaves began to use their drums to communicate, very associated with voodoo ceremonies, and conch shells. On August 22nd, 1791, a Hougan by the name, a Hougan is a voodoo priest, yes, and a female voodoo priest is called a mambo, and it is pretty equal opportunity. A few months later, the slaves began to use their drums to, I said this, so on August 22nd, 1791, that ceremony, Boukman organized a ceremony that was called the Wakaima ceremony, the Cayman Woods ceremony. So blood of the pig is served as libation, so people, it goes from mouth to mouth, they drink it. At the height of the ceremony, Boukman's prayer, if you can call it that, went something like this. The God of the white man inspires him with crime, but our God calls upon us to do good works. Our God, who is good to us, orders us to revenge our wrongs. He will direct our arms and aid us. The God of the whites has so often caused us to weep. Listen to the voice of liberty which speaks in the hearts of all of us. Boukman's incitement marks the beginning of the Haitian Revolution, which the mulattoes soon joined. So Toussaint Louverture emerges shortly afterwards. And this is partly where history becomes contested. His role at the beginning of the revolution is very murky at best. Was he a mastermind hiding behind other people, or was he a coward? And some of the tensions, even between Dessalines and Pétion, some accused him of being a coward early in the revolution. So he defeated Spanish troops in 1794, English troops in 1795, and Napoleonic France in 1803. I slipped. I shouldn't have mentioned those critical parts because I did not learn them in school. About Toussaint Louverture's involvement. I was glossed over. So he defeated Spanish troops in 1794, English troops in 1795, and Napoleonic France in 1803. Even before Haiti obtained its independence, Toussaint had established his power throughout the island. He put in place new laws, new taxes, a new currency, and new appointees in the most important posts. He opened trade with Britain and the US and encouraged French owners to remain in Haiti. Louverture was trapped by the French, shackled, and taken to Fort de Joux in the French Alps, where he died in a tiny cell. This is the part in school where he almost cried. They say he died of chagrin. And I have this memorized. I remember as a child, what does it mean to die of chagrin? But this is left us there. Right? This is what he said before he died. By capturing me, by overthrowing me, you have cut down in Saint-Domingue only the trunk of the tree of liberty. It will spring up again from the roots, for they are many and they are deep. So over the centuries, this poetic flourish has almost become a shibboleth for Haitians, Haitians. We can all recite it by heart. It's like inscribed in us. So it's strange to read in English because it's memorized in French. So two of Toussaint's generals, Jean-Jacques Dessalines and Henri Christophe, carried the torch. Christophe had learned the military trade as part of the volunteer colored fighters that Haiti had sent to reinforce American troops under Major General Benjamin Lincoln at the Battle of Savannah. There's quite a few, there's a whole troop of Haitians who participated. The two shared Louverture's vision of a plantation-based economy, but unlike Louverture, they envisioned it without the French. Bone of contention. They could not conceive of French presence on the island without a return to slavery. They adopted a scorched earth policy. You see all the scorched earth, a lot of fire. Actually, the more I dug into the Haitian history, what struck me was how much destruction there was. This constant burning and destroying. And Toussaint used a destroyed cap, which was a glorious, beautiful city, just torched it militarily as defensive, very deliberate. It was horrible, but we recognized it. Napoleon sent his brother-in-law, General Leclerc, with specific instructions to rid us of these gilded Africans. After leading 50,000 French soldiers to their death, Leclerc declared ruefully, "We have a false idea of the Negro." And he did send his best ships, his best soldiers. It was not just like the remnants. He took it very seriously. And Toussaint himself, when he saw them arrive, it was almost by surprise. It was just like, whoa. It makes for a great movie. If you're watching that there, it's like, okay, they have no chance, but they did. So on January 1st, 1804, Haiti proclaimed itself independent and adopted the Arawak name, meaning land of high mountains. That's what Haiti means, land of high mountains. A few months later, Dessalines declares himself emperor. Like Napoleon had, Haiti thus becomes the world's first black republic. Okay, so this section I titled Hagiography. So you can see why the holy trinity of the Haitian Revolution are Toussaint Louverture, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, and Henri Christophe. Of the three, Louverture was the most revered, if what I learned in school is any indication. Dessalines had a reputation for ruthlessness. He was, by all agreements, a better soldier, a better military person than Dessalines, but not quite as thoughtful, as deliberate. So that kind of darkened the halo on his head. Henri Christophe's halo fell to the floor when he ruled. He got to rule. He again, just like Dessalines, called himself king. He was cruel, authoritarian, and deposed. And there was a construction of the citadel, which was ruthless. Tons of people died, and so he was deposed. So if you want a good account of this, Alejo Carpentier, Cuban novelist, wrote The Kingdom of This World in 1949. It was a blow to Henri Christophe's legacy. But Toussaint Louverture's halo, on the other hand, seemed very stable. He died early, which spared him blame for some of the nasty aftermath of the revolution. He had left a lot of text, and he also died, per my early education, as a martyr who had brilliantly catacrotized the ideals of the French Enlightenment. And what do I mean by catacrotize? It's a term that's often used in post-colonial theory. Spivak in Kendall Sumall, the term speak, uses quite a bit. Catacrotize, it's to use the colonizers. It's basically to use the slave masters' tools against them. It's contra our lord. It is. So that's what Toussaint Louverture is largely known for. So Philippe Girard, so I call this part the takedown, the exposition of Toussaint Louverture as Saint. Philippe Girard, well-respected historian, published a biography on Toussaint Louverture. That's 2016. It is titled Toussaint Louverture, Revolutionary Life. One of the theses of the historian's book is that in Haiti, Toussaint Louverture was not anointed a saint until the rest of the world did so. As he would have it, the anointment began in the middle of the 19th century. And I quote, "Paradoxically, it was outside of Haiti that Louverture first developed a following. He was popular with white abolitionists in France, Britain, and the United States, who viewed him as proof that freedmen possessed the wisdom and the intelligence. Victor Schellcher, who spearheaded France's second abolition of slavery, in 1848 wrote a biography of Louverture that described him as a man of genius. The anointment was further mediated at the end of the same century by Frederick Douglass and W.E.B. Du Bois, among others, whom I suppose Jacob Lawrence read or knew with. Speaking to a white audience in 1893, Frederick Douglass noted Louverture's humane treatment of French planters. Later that day, to an appreciative black audience, he instead emphasized the Negro manhood of Haitian warriors like Louverture. To one group, he was a black Washington who had built a functioning state. To the other, he was a black Spartacus, Toussaint Louverture's own favorite moniker. A black Spartacus epithet who had destroyed an unfair system. To W.E.B. Du Bois, the great Negro had also been directly responsible for several defining moments in US history, starting with the Louisiana Purchase. Because the Leclerc expedition was bogged down in Saint-Domingue, Napoleon failed to reoccupy Louisiana and eventually sold it, all of which is true. It's axiomatic, it's accepted. The anointment came to a head in the middle of the 20th century during a strong post-colonial impulse. So Girard puts it this way. In the 20th century, as empires broke apart and many colonies across the world declared independence, Louverture was roundly seen as a precursor not only of Haitian independence, but of the anti-colonial movement more broadly, to the point where a one-sided hagiography became the norm both within and outside of Haiti. So why does Philippe Girard find it paradoxical that Toussaint Louverture was sainted first abroad and then at home? I think he's actually finds it paradoxical that he was sainted at all in any place, not just first abroad and then sainted. Well, it is contingent, let's say, it's not necessary. His book is the scholarly application of the George Orwell maxim that all saints should be judged guilty until proven innocent. The evidence he marshals and analyzes strongly suggests that much about Toussaint Louverture, the person and the revolutionary, is at least as cautionary as it is exemplary. Pace, Jacob Lawrence. In other words, much of it might lend, much of the evidence might lend itself to the festering of the healing of black psychic wounds resulting from slavery and colonization. Some of it might exemplify why Fanon thought that decolonization was perhaps as important as liberty, as freedom from chains. So one aspect about him that is very striking to my eyes today was his elitism. Supposedly, his father, Hippolyte, was an Alada aristocrat. Alada became part of the Dahomey kingdom through conquest. They were conquered. Enslaved Alada people in Haiti enjoyed a measure of privilege because they were deemed by planters to be hardworking and intelligent. So there was a hierarchy. And Toussaint belonged to the hierarchy. They were also the dominant group. Among the enslaved, the Aladas were well regarded for being, Toussaint Louverture was well regarded for being a king's, his father, Hippolyte, was well regarded for being a king's son, and then passed on to Toussaint Louverture. According to Toussaint's son, Isaac, who seemed particularly proud of the aristocratic roots of the family, Gaou Guinou was the name of the supposed Alada king. That's a bit murky, but that was part of the mythology that ran in the family, and that was deployed. So he had, and then moved to, there's a craving for respect, recognition, and social status. It was a driving, an Achilles heel of sorts. You might even use terms, modern terms like self-hatred. I am black, he once said, but I have the soul of a white man. His first language was Fon, F-O-N, African. He spoke at home with his father. And he was still fluent in it when he died, but he preferred to speak Creole instead when Creole had more cachet, and French instead of Creole when French had more cachet. He would only use fun when it was most convenient, that is, when he wanted to prove his credentials. There's quite a bit of a chameleon in him, which triggers accusations of insincerity, duplicity. Throughout his life, he shunned voodoo, even persecuted some of its practitioners, all in the name of Catholicism and respectability. He was not just, or in his mind, he was not just a fervent Catholic, but ostentatiously fervent as a Catholic. The more he matured, the more he preferred to wear the white cotton vest and the tricolor uniform of the planters and the officers of the French army. When in his cell in Fort de Joux, he was brought civilian clothes and cued to take off his uniform. It's the uniform of a French officer. He took it as an affront to his honor. So much of this, what was striking, is actually how French he was, in a sort of deep French. That colonization had its tentacles were in him in ways that is just absolutely stunning. That was new to me. I thought of Toussaint Louverture as a Haitian. Toussaint Louverture often thought of himself as a Frenchman, in the service of the king, very dedicated to the king. There was quite a bit of an ego. Yes, it's connected to that self-respect and low self-esteem. A town near the Artibonite River already bore his name, as did a street in Cap. This is what you have. Cap Haitien was kind of the hotbed of the Haitian Revolution, where he's from. That's where most of it. That's what this plantation was. It's in the south. It's one of the most distinctive areas. The speech is fairly different. It's most different from any other part of Haiti, and their food is particular. And to this day, there's a lot of fermentation there, revolutionary fermentation. A town near the Artibonite River bore his name, as did a street in Cap. In July 1801, he carved a whole new province in the region of Gonaïves and named it after himself. He liked to organize elaborate receptions worthy of a European court. This is all from Philippe Girard. Keeping lower class blacks at bay, he mingled with white colonists who played along. When one of his white guests made a particularly well-crafted compliment, he beamed and whispered to his entourage, "You Negroes should try to learn these manners. This is what you get from being raised in France. My children will be the same." Sure enough, his children, Isaac and Placide, died in France. Lived and died. They were returned to Haiti at one point, and they were part of the plays between him and Napoleon and Leclerc and so on. So his attachment to the monarchy is also stunning. Whether they were celebrating, this is again Girard, whether they were celebrating the 16th feast day or flying the white flag of Royalist France, the rebels who served with Louverture made it clear that they had taken up arms to support the rights of the king, our master, as well as our religion. Yes? You could say in some instances he might be catachrotizing. But at the end of the day, it seems fairly sincere, particularly with his death. He was writing to Napoleon, and being offended that Napoleon would not respond, would not deem him almost a bona fide soldier in the French Empire. Between 1793 and 1794, Toussaint Louverture became a Spanish officer. As ironic as it may sound today, he did so out of loyalty to the French monarchy. By his logic, France was turning away from the monarchy, right? French Revolution and so on. Whereas Spain, a Catholic kingdom par excellence, was ruled by a relative of Louis XVI. To die for my king and for freedom, he said, this is my motto. Charles de Gaulle would eventually make clever, cynical use of, he will catechize, to Louverture's attachment to France. After Toussaint Louverture was rehabilitated in Haiti, several requests were made. So this was when I was in Haiti, 70s, 80s. Several requests were made to de Gaulle to return his remains to Haiti so that he could get a proper burial in his native land. De Gaulle replied that Louverture was a French general and that as such he was already buried in his country, France. So the next part that's unsettling is his prevarications and equivocation. So he was freed in 1791 throughout the revolution. So and this was hidden, and he was not upfront about that. And again, for credibility, it would have been a problem if he had not been like the others, slaves. He had freedom. So he was freed in 1791. He didn't divulge who freed him and why. The omission helped preserve his credibility among those still enslaved. In all likelihood, he was freed because he had formed a relationship with what in Haiti we call a big white, a caretaker of the Breda plantation named Bayon. And there's evidence that he was very attached to Bayon. He even thought he was very generous and good, kind, whereas the evidence from others shows that he was a cruel slave driver. So Louverture repaid the favor by hiding Bayon and his family in the woods, or helping them hide in the woods to escape the wrath of the rebels. And there's suggestions that he even helped them after the revolution moved to the US. This was a slave driver of the worst kind, but he felt there's a debt of gratitude to him. There's a serious bond, and plenty of, I think, incontrovertible evidence of that bond. Around 1776, he bought a slave called Jean-Baptiste. He eventually freed him so that the slave could get married. In 1979, he leased a 16-acre coffee estate in Grande Rivière. It came with 13 enslaved people, one man, the man's 4 sisters, and their 8 children, one of whom was none other than Jean-Jacques Dessalines. In other words, Toussaint Louverture became something of a slave driver, and Jean-Jacques Dessalines was his slave. This has amazing repercussions. This is a part, it's kind of the dirty secret of Haitian history. Actually, not quite dirty. I'll get to the dirty one. This is a prelude to the dirty part. In 1781, at the end of the lease, Toussaint Louverture returned to the Breda plantation as if he had never been freed. So this is almost a stereotype of the slave who's freed, but then there's not, so returns to the Breda plantation, where Bayon was. He had 2 families. This is another tidbit that was revealed fairly recently. He started the relationship with his second wife around 1784 while his first wife was still alive. Had not divorced her, and when he was still officially married to her. The good Catholic that he was okay with this beginning. And it's not, I'm not being judgmental at all here. I have no problem with that. But he pretty meticulously hid all of this from everyone. His second marriage, and he would equivocate whenever it came to. So the marriage that they recognize as the official one is actually the non-official one. He had about 16 children in total. And I'm not sure how many were adopted, but some of them, he did adopt some children. So in 1792, Louverture, on behalf of Biassou, one of his colleagues, approached Spanish officials in Santo Domingo, the other half of the island. They asked them to relay a message to the King of France. They asked the Spanish officials. The message was that they would agree to send their fellow rebel slaves back to their plantations by assuring them that they would now work as free people with a pension. The idea was to convince them to surrender their weapons, and once they did that, to return them to slavery, to shackle them again. In exchange for their betrayal, they expected protection and freedom papers signed by the king. The king did not accept the offer. So you can imagine, Had he accepted the offer, and had Louverture and his acolytes made good on their promise, Louverture's legacy would be the opposite of what came today. In 1799, the French planned to launch an invasion of Jamaica from Saint-Domingue. One of the aims, again, in 1799, the French planned to launch an invasion of Jamaica from Saint-Domingue. One of the aims was to emancipate the slaves. But Louverture subverted the scheme by secretly informing the British. Right? This I learned, Brown University, the John Claude-Rhéal Library has a very good blog posting on Toussaint Louverture, and this is there. Okay, so as a planter between 1801 and between 1800 and 1801, his idea of wage labor was to many of his contemporaries indistinguishable from slavery. That's it. So, conclusion, you can see why in Haiti Toussaint Louverture was not particularly well regarded during the first 5 decades after the revolution. You can also see why Jean-Jacques Dessalines ratted on him. That's a dirty secret. He actually ratted on him to Leclerc, who subsequently captured him. I'm not sure that it was sufficient, but it was certainly very instrumental. So, where does that leave us? I recognize that suturing Henry Louis Gates with the American flag and George Washington and Thomas Jefferson is significantly different from suturing a Haitian, such as myself, with a Haitian flag and Jean-Jacques Dessalines and Toussaint Louverture. That Washington and Jefferson are white while Gates is black makes the suturing a little difficult, particularly when Washington and Jefferson are found wanting with respect to race and slavery. I don't think it helps either that the American flag is an empire. America is an empire. So, a black American subject can cancel Washington and Jefferson, so to speak, without doing damage to their psyche. A Haitian, on the other hand, does not have that luxury. We can only be grateful for the saintly aspects of Toussaint Louverture's biography and be honest about those aspects of it that seem so sinister to us. So I will end this spiel by saying that in spite of Philly Girard, hagiographic treatment of Toussaint Louverture is not quite dead. Hazard Racine published a book in 2022 that basically goes back to a lot of the hagiography. They don't dispute some of those gray areas, they just spin them differently. But that anybody could spin them the way that Girard does is, I think, troubling. So, thank you. The time went by fast. So I think our tradition is for students to ask questions first. So go ahead. The first below. Questions, comments? Yes?
Do you think that there's like any likelihood that Jacob Lawrence would have known this type of history?
No. That's a great question. I don't think so. Much of it trickles out 70s, 1970s. A lot of it that was not widely divulged. You had to be curious, read the right books. And then some of it was not until 2013. No, the likelihood that you would not know much of this. Yeah, I did not know much of this. And I'm glad. Much of it. I mean, the first surprise to me was actually how much concrete evidence there still was. And I think it has to do with the French allowing access to certain things, but there were records, and even of his captivity and the conversations he had with other people.
I have a vague idea that the Haitian Revolution and Toussaint were important in American history too. And I'm kind of curious about that, if he was seen as a kind of hero in slave times. I don't know how much he was known, but I understand that the revolution was
This is
known.
part of what I cut off.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he was instrumental. There's a book written about how much conversation, how much communication there was among the diaspora, members of the diaspora. And the Haitian had ripple effects all over the place. It was a nightmare for George Jefferson, for others. And Haiti, they were, Haiti was not recognized, and there were several, Judge Vesey, quite a few that were planning stuff that were very inspired by Haiti. Martinique was, if Martinique became what it is, it's largely because of the fear that what happened in Haiti. Martinique. So the ripple effects were huge. Yes.
Actually, Clint Smith had something to say about that in his book, The Way the Word is Passed, and he gives quite a good insight into how frightened the Southerners were of this revolution in Haiti, and that it was going to incite other riots in the South. And in fact, there were some riots and things that we've never learned about. So I would highly recommend that you look at Clint Smith's book called How the Word is Passed.
That's the book
It's really
That's
excellent.
exactly the book that
And it's very well researched,
Yeah.
and he's such a sensitive.
Yeah, it was rediscovered, right? Or discovered fairly late, been written. Yes.
So do try to read that.
Yeah,
I think everybody in this room
I have
should
it.
read it,
I have
because
it.
it tells you more about American history from the perspective of a black perspective, which is always very, very hard to read, but very, very informative and wonderful. So, and he's such a nice man who wrote the book, and very intelligent. He has a doctorate from Harvard in education, and he taught high school for a long time. So he's also a poet, and so I think that he brings a poetic spirit to this whole retelling, and it's divided into 8 parts. It's fascinating. He talks about the different sites in the South that he felt were very important in the history of slavery. He went to many, many sites, but he then selected these 8 sites to talk about the different aspects. And how history has been taught in the past, and how some people are trying to teach it more accurately.
Thank you. Yes.
I had a question. It's more on a personal level. So you're a graduate student in Brown, and you discover a book that basically dismantles one of your childhood heroes, or it sounds like what you were learning in elementary school in Haiti. And I was wondering how that felt, and if that was a pivotal moment for you as a scholar, and how that influenced your work after that point.
It did not happen while I was at Brown.
Oh.
I was at UC Santa Barbara when I did my master's. They were my good friend from Puerto Rico, who's black Puerto Rican. We practiced karate. We were eating, pork trout and so on, and we were talking. I don't know how we got to Haiti and so on. And I was waxing glorious about Haiti's imperial past, and that's stuff I picked up in school. Toussaint had an imperial impulse, basically annexed. He pulled a Putin on Santo Domingo, and then Boyer later, right? For years, God basically annexed the island and controlled it. So it's imperialism. But I was proud of the soldiers and how powerful Haiti was. And he just looked at me and said, "Why would you be proud of that?" And I was like, huh. So it was a very slow, that was one of the very telling things. How did that happen? But with respect to Dessalines having betrayed Haiti, I learned this fairly. I had heard that someone had said that might have been the case. I didn't believe it until I dug and actually started reading stuff. So my field is not really history, Haitian history. So to a large extent, my development in that regard was arresting. So it's when I have a reason to do some research, but I'm not a historian. So how does it affect my identity? I think my identity is that as a ruthless intellectual, and I've moved away from nationalism. And I don't know, I think I might echo that of any kind. I have more sympathies with subaltern nationalisms, like Puerto Rico against the US, right? But as soon as you become powerful, you become a problem. And in the case of Haiti, there's still those sympathies. You see in my bio, I said a native and a citizen of Haiti. I've been in this country since I was 13. I'm still a citizen of Haiti. I'm very attached to my Haitian identity. But that does not mean that I must believe all the myths about it. But there's lessons. I mean, one of the Girard and the other writer who writes about Toussaint, they apologize for Toussaint. So Girard is constantly apologizing as he's describing, as he's revealing all of this nasty stuff. And how does he justify? How does he cleanse his position? He's white, right? The other author is from Mauritius, but he's white and lives in Louisiana. So his idea is that, well, he was just a man of his times. He was just conflicted. And Aimé Césaire had also picked up that the tragedy of Henri Christophe. So it's a classic thing that you must judge them by the standards of their time. And that's never been persuasive to me. It's never persuaded me, because part of what we find exceptional, part of why we worship folks, I mean, Plato, Socrates, is because they transcended the norms of their time. So what I find stunning is that Toussaint transcended so many, and was just so mired in so many others. So I think a question that's like completely unanswered is, how is it that that happens with people? It's fairly consistent. Like Socrates, for example, Plato, it's like there are things that they were so, but with gender, not so much, with slavery, not so much. Why are some things so hard to rise above? Yes.
Even with the recognition that leaders like Toussaint would have to take on whiteness to appeal to his oppressors, does that leave space for Black liberation to still exist? Is it a fantasy? Or is it something that can actually manifest, such as the Haitian Revolution?
I think this gets us to collegiate seminar. I think what you call whiteness can be extremely useful. What bothers me about Toussaint Louverture is not that he instrumentalized whiteness, but the parts of it that he did. Right? I recognize Foucault as a kin, even though he's white, right? And I recognize some Black folks as enemies, even though they're Black. Right? What I mean by enemies, what they represent, their ideologies, are alien. So part of what I think with the Enlightenment, for example, they say Toussaint Louverture did catacretize, he did. There was some, but he had serious reservations about that. To the end, it wasn't clear that he was really fully, that's the disagreement between those two big biographers. One of them thinks that he actually was committed to the ideal of the Enlightenment, but even that is not clear. So he was very selective. Catholicism, religion was big, very persistent, and you can trace that to his heritage, African heritage of religion. So to me, it's partly what, right? What is it about white culture that you might be deploying, adopting? Because at the end of the day, I don't think they're really white or Black or anything. They're just ideas and ways of being and ideologies. And so what is useful, what is good, what is true is what matters to me. I think Toussaint Louverture was not, he wasn't brilliant. He was really, one of the things, you see strategy and so on. And one of the things, I didn't say that, but there were things that I learned later that made me even more proud, more impressed with him. For example, his use, his deployment of disease. I had read about that in The Kingdom of This World, but I thought Alejo Carpentier was being a magic realist, a surrealist. It wasn't true, but it was very planned. There's plenty of documentation that he knew that certain, so all the battles, everything was, he counted on viruses and pathogens being an ally of the blacks and the whites. And so militarily it was just amazing. And I also admire his striving. He was, he came from nothing. He really did come from, well, not nothing, but it's not easy, so he navigated quite a few. But I still wonder sometimes even if his ends really justified the means. And I think some of those issues are still resonating in Haitian culture today. So I will not leave until you do. So tell me, if you have any other questions.
I have another question. Are you a student of Lawrence as well?
No.
Okay.
No, I'm see, that's the problem. One of my fears coming today was that I was going to be in a room with people with big noses who know all things about art and history. I'm neither. I'm in literature. I'm in the department. Well, yeah, so I'm an amateur here. So I can't do this in my sleep. Yes?
So we've talked a lot about like kind of all the things around canceling, you know, canceling histories, canceling people. There's a lot that kind of gets, there's a lot of kind of reaction going on in various ways. What's something that you, as somebody who grew up in Haiti, can tell us that, you know, maybe is a positive thing that you want to preserve, or that you know, you're proud of? About Haiti. Just any aspect of place, culture, people, anything.
This is part of why I told you I'm still a Haitian citizen. And believe me, it's not easy in this world. I'm very attached to my identity. And part of what I'm actually attached to is the identity, is the tragic dimension of it. Yeah. I would much rather be a member of a struggling people than to be a member of an empire. That's really, really important to me. That's a really important part of my identity. And what is culture? The language, the food that we eat, the way that we are. Yeah, so I gave you the wrong impression, which is a question for me. To a large extent, I'm washing dirty dishes in the family, and if my sister was here, she'd be very angry with me. I'm saying all these negative things about Haiti to a white audience, but I do think that is part of the problem. In a way, part of our damage is that we can't speak truth because we're so concerned about how others might use it. You know, I mean, part of what I admired about the books I read was how unflinching those historians were. I trusted that they were not. I mean, if you look at the history from the very beginning, Toussaint Louverture was very wary of pictures. There's no portraits of it. It's almost the opposite of Frederick Douglass. Even though he was very worried about maybe because he was so worried about projecting his image, he didn't want pictures. Nothing portraits. There's like one, I think. So we are so concerned about what others think of us and what putting on a good face respectively. And I think that was part of his problem, is that we have to have those conversations ourselves, and I think there's things to be learned from them. So at the end of the day, is Toussaint Louverture exemplary or is he cautionary? I think equal parts. He's both. He's very exemplary in so many ways, but in many other ways, he made some serious mistakes. He was selfish. He was a striver. He was a capitalist. He was okay. He was a family man. That was like the one constant value. He cared about his family, but he was okay with selling other slaves so that he would free the slaves that were in his family. That's a problem. So decolonization, I think, that's a good question. Toussaint Louverture freed slaves and freed himself, but he did not decolonize himself. So mentally, psychically, he was. So I think this is a lesson to learn from that history. But I'm very grateful that Toussaint Louverture freed Haiti and that we became a country in 1804. And in spite of all of this, I prefer being Haitian to being Martinican and being Puerto Rican. That's not the question. Yeah, I'm still very proud of the Haitian Revolution. Very, very proud. It doesn't mean that Toussaint Louverture was the same. And Dessalines was even less of the same. And Haitian, but they all had their flaws, but together they delivered something that was extraordinary. I mean, so one question I have is really, how do you introduce this in school? Or a grade school teacher, would I do this spiel to students or a version that they could appreciate? Which part of, I mean, it's kind of believing in Santa Claus. Part of me is kind of like glad that I believed in this Toussaint Louverture Santa Claus kind of thing, because I'm not sure I would have been able to handle it earlier on. But I don't think that was the reason it was presented to me that way. And I think most Haitians, even older Haitians, even more educated Haitians, the likelihood is that the romanticization of Toussaint Louverture, it's very protective, that's what if I did this talk in a room with Haitians, there might be revolvers.
Isn't that the same thing that happens with Thomas Jefferson? I mean, that people are questioning in America.
But that's my whole point.
Yes, I know. I
And why
understand.
should we not be able
We
to
should
do
be.
this?
That is exactly.
Are we so weak in our psyches to think that we can't say that? Why don't
He
we
did
just
great
treat
things,
Toussaint
but he had a
Louverture?
lot of weaknesses. So.
Right. I mean, because you have race is a confounding variable in this country. I think it makes it easy to cancel. I mean, if you find this stuff out about Martin Luther King, about Gandhi, I mean, we do. I just don't, I guess in general, I just don't believe in cancellation. Right?
And so I guess connecting on that, the poem that you started with really sticks with me, particularly she's listing on Christopher Robin and all of these different quaint characters that were a part of her life. And just that there are so many fewer options, not because they didn't exist, but I think history has not done a good enough job at seeing what that. So I think that goes to your question of how do you create a more comprehensive picture earlier without doing the damage of wanting to Santa Claus, not wanting to know that maybe Santa Claus had an affair or something like that. You really there's a danger to that.
See, I'm thrilled that that child had that Toussaint Louverture as a shield.
Yeah.
But this is a child. I'm an adult. Right? And I guess this is how conservatives feel about what critical race theory is doing to their fetishes, right? The Washingtons and so on. Sure. They think, yeah, it's too early, it's too whatever. But if you, I think it's an excuse. I don't think they want it done anywhere. Right. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, and I had thoughts about should I do this? Should I bust people's bubbles? Because this is technically celebration, right? And this is not celebratory, or is it?
It's revelatory. Yes. It's celebratory.
That's how I roll. I celebrate in Revelation. You have something to say, yes?
No. I've been listening. I don't have a question.
I think it's celebratory because it's celebrating the weird complexity of life and how amazing it is that this actually happened even though it was tainted with all kinds of stuff, including a heavy debt load eventually, but it happened, and, you know, it's great.
Yeah, Trouillot, who is our big intellectual post-structuralist, because he's a historian, not of Haiti necessarily. He said that the silencing of Haitian history is the rule, because even when it was happening, it was not believable.
I think it is incredible.
So the French curriculum, for example, I mean, you talk about people looking bad. Napoleon looks worse than Toussaint Louverture with respect to the treatment of Toussaint Louverture. And he was mean, nasty, and petty. But Toussaint Louverture, that part of Haitian history, is not taught in French schools. And the lycée, it's not taught. Which is, it's part of French history, but it's not taught.
Well, I wonder if it's so important to people to keep the vision going, because it's still revolutionary in some way. It's still threatening to some people, I guess, at least in France.
Well,
Even
French's
here as
idea
well.
of itself is completely incompatible with the Haitian Revolution.
Yeah.
Right? It is, I mean, it's similar to America when with critical race theory. So it would be the equivalent. Catherine, please tell me.
I have not understood a lot of what you said, because I wish you had a microphone. My ears are old, and I could hear the beginning of each sentence,
Yes.
a few words, and then,
I'm sorry.
so I'm so sorry about that.
One thing to note is this program is being recorded, so we will have it on our
Okay.
YouTube station later.
And I have a microphone here. It's
It's not a
possible.
microphone?
Yeah, well, it's not a
okay,
microphone
okay,
for you.
yes,
It's a
that's
microphone.
all I know.
It's a microphone for the recording.
Oh.
Okay. Yes. Any?
Well, wonderful. Can we all give Claude another round of applause?